I mean, I didn't know that crayons came from trees.
Yeah. And once you guess it, you can come and sit down and we'll keep rolling. Little electronics that go in your hand. Trees making that back. So, neat little things we do every day. So who ate breakfast this morning? Yeah, what, you have cereal?
No,
Bacon?
no,
What you have?
I just had the apples.
Had an apple?
That's
That apple came off a tree. That cereal, you poured it out of a box, that came from a tree. Anybody have pancakes?
No,
So what do you put on pancakes?
syrup.
Yeah, put maple syrup on that comes from trees. So little things like that each day that you're doing the impact. So crayons, pencils, utilizing that resource every day. And a key part of that is that we're able to harvest that timber and then we're able to replant it. And so that's another key part, so that makes it sustainable. So and in Georgia, we're growing 48% more than we're removing. So we have a very sustainable product throughout the state that we're utilizing. So the more you utilize those products, the more money that starts flowing to that economy that goes to the landlord to help them manage their land and keep that forest healthy. And that's some of the stuff that you'll see today that we'll be talking about.
One way.
Also trying to get the motion.
Nutrients in the soil,
For some reason, those trees look like
sunlight. So you got to eliminate, some of those trees in order for your better trees to continue to grow.
So this is a very important tree to the state of Georgia, and the scientific name is Acaria illinoensis. And you think that's kind of weird because you think pecan trees in Georgia. Well, this tree is actually not native to Georgia. It's a compound leaves. Now, if I pull this off right here, this is one whole leaf, which looks weird because you think, oh, count, and it's like, oh, these are individual leaves. The leaf is determined by the axillary bud. Now you can see on some of these, pull it back a little bit, there's a bud right there in the axil. And this is where you determine where the leaf derives from, not necessarily from the individual, what we would consider a leaf. And so you've got the general structure of what's considered this would be the petiole, and then these individual shoots would be what are considered a rachis. Does anybody know, anybody know what pecans are used in, or pecan pie? I mean, it's a very important nut crop for the state of Georgia. It's a very expensive product, especially if shipped across the country. So it brings in a lot of money for us in the state. And so, yeah, that's pecan tree. All right. So if you look at this leaf, which would you say this is, red or white oak? No, it's red. It's got the bristle tips. And so this tree in particular is a northern red oak. It's Quercus rubra, rubra being red. And this is an important mast species for wildlife. Back in the day, before we had chestnut blight come through and wipe out our chestnuts, red oaks and white oaks were important mast species, but because they flowered so early and chestnut flowered late, sometimes they were susceptible to early frost. So this tree can oftentimes be susceptible to early frost and it'll lose its mast for the year. But the nice thing is with white oaks and red oaks flowering at different times, you have a bit of an advantage in your frost might come a little bit early or it might come a little bit late and your trees might be okay. Does anybody deer hunt? Okay. Do you know why or what time of year you'd want to hunt under a red oak over a white oak? As the acorns fall and they sit on the ground, the tannins will degrade and you get later into the winter, well, the deer need fat. So white oaks, on the other hand, they're higher in carbohydrates. when bucks are in rut, they need the energy. They're on the move a lot more. They're more likely to be under a white oak tree. So it's just a little something, if you're deer hunting or you like to deer hunt, and you're trying to maybe gauge like, okay, where do I want to set up my stand? Most people hunt under sword feeders, but it's kind of nice to be able to know like, hey, if I hunt under this type of tree at this time of year, it might help me with my hunting. This is a valuable timber species as well for our needs. People use red oak in furniture, in chests. If it's not as good a quality, they'll use it in pallet lumber. So it's a very important species for what we do in Georgia. It's also very valuable to landowners, when they're doing a timber harvest. Pines fetch a lot of money, but other good quality red oak, that's what makes it hyphenately over the pecan, where it's just a shoot and then an individual leaf coming off. This is actually not native to Georgia. It's an invasive species. It does have very beautiful flowers in the spring or midsummer. And it's kind of one of those trees, it is an invasive species, but it's still, since it's such an aesthetically good looking tree, when I see them in the woods, I still like to see them. The leaves on these will actually close up at night. It's a pretty cool, if you sit out at night and you find one of these trees and you watch it, you can watch the leaves slowly close at night. And if you look right here, you can see some of the pods. What does that look like, y'all? Peas, green beans. So you know what type of plant family that's in? It'd be considered the legume family. And why are peanuts and soybeans or other legumes important, especially in agriculture? I figure you're an ag guy.
To an extent.
Yeah. So a lot of times if you have nitrogen poor soil, things that are, if you plant legumes on the soil, they're very important because they'll fixate, they have little bacteria on the roots that will fixate atmospheric nitrogen. And they'll introduce nitrogen into the soil, or if you have nutrient poor soil, it'll improve the soil conditions. Now, I would not recommend planting an invasive species that's a legume. I'd plant a native legume, but it's just kind of a cool fact. And I don't know if I told you guys, but the scientific name for this is Albizia julibrism. It's a very long scientific name. But yeah, these kind of have a pretty cool tropical look. They were introduced as a shade tree, a yard tree, but they don't, as far as value to our forest, they're non-valuable because we don't want them here. They crowd out the native species and they cause issues with our habitats, especially in quail populations. 15, 20 foot tall. They live very short lives. And they serve a lot of ecological value in the sense that these seed pods can be utilized by wildlife, and it also, like I said, it fixates nitrogen. And so if you had nitrogen poor soils and you wanted to improve your soil conditions, redbud would be a good option. It's also got really pretty flowers in the spring, so a lot of people like to plant it for that reason as well. You have to be careful with a lot of shade-tolerant species sometimes, though, because if you plant them in an open area with a lot of sunlight, what do you think happens to a tree that prefers shade? Yeah, it's gonna get sun stunted. It's gonna either get outcompeted by trees that grow a little taller, or you'll see the leaves will start to kind of shrivel, and they don't like it very much. So if you're doing some sort of yard planning or some sort of landscape architecture, which might be something that you guys might be interested in going into, it's another kind of facet of what we do, but it's in more of a landscape and design aspect. But this would be a tree that you would want to plant preferably under another canopy. These are kind of shaded, but they still are getting a lot of full sun, so this might not be the best area for redbuds, but all right, you guys should know this one, I feel like. You're thinking kind of in the right direction. cherries are planted in a lot of the same areas that this tree would be planted. This is actually a dogwood tree.
Oh,
Yeah. And so these trees, they make a little white flower, and it makes a cross. And you know, in Christian theology, it's supposed to represent, you know, the cross of Jesus. It also produces these little red fruits that are pretty neat. Let's see. Now, if you look at, let's see if I can find a good example on here. So the leaves are opposite. So you can see there's one opening right there where two leaves are coming off from side to side. So this is an example of simple leaf, entire, but it's opposite. And so these key factors are very important for when we're determining what species we have, because we can go, okay, well, this is a simple leaf and it's opposite, and then you start going through your brain and you're like, well, there's only so many, you know, simple and opposite, and then you might be able to determine the fruit, which are these little red berries, and then it's got a pretty distinct bark too. Now this is one that definitely does not like sunlight at all. If you plant these in full sun, the leaves will shrivel up and they don't look very well at all. This is another species that's important for aesthetic purposes, wildlife purposes. Does not necessarily serve humans a direct purpose, you know, as far as a lumber product or something we can use, but you know, if you guys like having birds in your backyard, this is something you can make OSB board with it, pulp and paper products. So it's a very important product. And the scientific name for this one is Pinus taeta. I think I told y'all I may have not told y'all the slash pine one, but it was Pinus eliatii. And so they basically form the same function, but you know, they grow on slightly different habitats. This pine tree, you can plant just about anywhere, except for really sandy soils. I've seen people plant this stuff in almost like swampland to fairly upland sites, but it's not necessarily the best wildlife species. And it's got a little bit darker bark, and this is what we consider a white oak. If you look at the leaves on these, as opposed to the red oak, notice how the lobes are a little bit shallower. Red oak was the lobes were a lot more pointy. And this also doesn't have any bristle tips. So that's a very important distinguishing characteristic of this species. And like I was telling you guys earlier, if any of you deer hunt, you know, this is one that a tree that you would want to hunt under when the bucks are in rut, because they need those carbohydrates, and the tannins are a little bit lower. This is a very important species for, you know, the state of Georgia, and also for a lot of our industries. Particularly if you look at a lot of scotches and whiskeys, they'll actually use this species for the barrels. So they'll take them to a cooperage and they'll toast or char the insides of the barrels. And they have these, what's called a vessel tyloses. And so they allow the flavors of the wood to kind of soak into the whiskey or the bourbon or whatever you have it, and kind of add a little bit of flavor. And so there's actually been a lot of work to do restoration, because they have cut so many of these down for that purpose, because it's also used in flooring and lumber. So this is a very important species for us to plant and maintain. Oaks are a little bit tricky too, because when you're regenerating an oak, you can't just plant them like a pine tree. Pine trees are what we consider shade intolerant. So you can plant pine trees in an open field and they'll just kind of grow up. Oaks kind of require what we consider an old growth forest. And so what they'll do is you'll have a forest that's grown up, and they'll kind of pop up in the understory and wait for canopy openings to open up. That gives them a chance to pop up and kind of squeeze in between. A lot of times if you plant them in an open field, it gets a little tricky because they'll get outcompeted by some faster growing species. So it's very important that when we're managing sites with white oak in particular, and we're doing timber harvest, sometimes we don't take the best trees. Sometimes we leave the better trees because they'll help reseed, and it's something we can use later. So it's a different management technique than from how we do things with pine trees. But if we don't do things like this, we'll have a lot more less marginal species, or our species aren't as good to wildlife that are growing up in our forests. A scientific name of this tree is Quercus alba. I don't think I told you all that. And so yeah, it doesn't have any really super distinctive characteristics. I think they're pretty trees, especially if you can kind of manage the understory around them. They'll kind of grow with like a nice, pretty, open top, and they'll have like a really clean. And it's also got a semi-similar fruit. So the red bud had a legume, and this was a pod type fruit. It's one singular unit, where the legume will have individual seeds inside of it. This species does not necessarily serve a whole lot of purpose as far as us and lumber purposes, but it's an important species for wildlife, and a lot of people will plant them as shade trees. They've got very big leaves, and they provide a lot of value in shade cover amongst our urban forest settings. And so yeah, this is southern catalpa, and the scientific name is Catalpa bignonioides. Notice it's got a peeling bark, so it starts to peel, and it'll peel like this into older age. It'll get kind of a gray, ashy color. One thing that's interesting about this tree is the axillary buds are covered by the petiole, and so you see where it kind of swells right there? The petiole the axillary bud is underneath the petiole. And so these are pretty distinct leaves. They're maple-ish, or they kind of look similar to a maple, but they're tubed, and they've got this kind of concave base, and they have the pointed lobe. So oftentimes people will mistake these, if they're unsure of a maple tree. These typically grow in wetter areas and are susceptible to a lot of rot in sometimes the crevice areas. And so these are very important for cavity nesting animals, such as raccoons, and cavity nesting birds. Sometimes when American settlers first showed up in the Americas, some of these sycamores were so big and the rotten areas were so big at the base that they would actually use them for stables for small animals. So they could put a little gate on the front, and the animals could live in the rotted out area. But yeah, this is Platanus occidentalis is the scientific name. And this is not really a good lumber species, but like I said, it provides benefit to wildlife for the habitat. Given it does rot out a lot, that's areas that our cavity nesters can kind of hide away and seek cover and refuge. So, all right, we've got one more. I'm guessing you guys can understand why it's called longleaf pine. It's got these huge needles that just kind of, almost weigh the branches down. And that's actually a limiting factor the further you go up in the state of Georgia, because these are very susceptible to ice damage. So this is a southern coastal plains species. Now, longleaf used to cover something like 60 million acres in the southeast, and the range was reduced down to about 4 because people would cut them, and loblolly pine would seed in, or they would plant something else that they considered to have better genetics. And one of the limiting factors in that is this tree has what's called a grass stage. And so when it's first seeded into the ground, it'll form a little bunch grass with the bud kind of tucked away at the base. And that provides some fire tolerance for prescribed burning. If you look at these buds, they're real thick and large buds, and they're kind of contained with the needles. And what happens is when you have a prescribed fire come through, these needles will protect that bud. And that's important because, in a lot of our ecosystems in the southeast, they're managed by fire. And this is the kind of the premier species for that. And so if you've ever seen a quail plantation in southeast Georgia, This is typically the species that you'll see planted, especially on a lot of the upland areas. And it doesn't necessarily directly provide wildlife benefit, but there's certain species, like the red cockaded woodpecker, that rely on species like this and slash pine that are older, 60-year-old, more mature species.
Just anything that we do to manage forests.
Control burns.
Yeah, that's a big one. What's controlled burns do?
It eliminates, like the dead fall on the ground, that if there was a fire, it would light up and then burn everything else down. You don't want that. It would be controlled. Right.
That's right. It'd be a wildfire then. Good point. What else? Does-
Weed whacker.
Yeah, that's a lot of work in the forest, though.
Yeah.
What else would fire do? We'll get
It
into it in a little bit. But
allows for new growth.
new growth, yeah.
It burns
For what?
plants
Plant?
and trees.
What takes advantage of the plant?
Animals.
Animals. Yep. So, and forest management, basically, it's about what we can do as humans to help make the stand or the forest as healthy as it can be and produce as much wood, if that's your main priority, or produce as much wildlife, or look the best, whatever your objectives are for your property. It's managing that to try to meet those objectives. So what's neat about forestry is, managing multiple use management. When you're trying to manage for all these different things, a lot of times they correlate with each other. And if you're trying to manage for timber growth, you may not know it, but you're also doing the same things that wildlife need too. Or if you're protecting your water quality around streams and lakes and rivers, or protecting the soil, making it look better, they all kind of correlate. So you can use forests for more than just one thing. Who likes to hunt? All y'all scouts. So just recreation use only, just for hunting deer or turkey or quail, or your trees. There's even age management and uneven age management. And even age management means they're all this benefiting from it. Wildlife. Yeah. It's not being converted into a parking lot for Walmart. But if I cut this tree out, this tree's soaking up all the water and nutrients right here. So if I cut this tree out, what do you think these other trees around it are going to do? Thrive. They're going to thrive, aren't they? They're going to get, there's only so much water and nutrients and sunlight, in a given area. So all these trees are competing for all those elements. I talked about this in the last group. Say we got 100 people, okay? And we got one pizza to feed 100 people. There's gonna be some mad people. How much that tree's growing every year? Is that tree stressed out and not growing much, or is it growing good? All right. So what you want to do is you want to aim right for the very center of that tree and try to catch that very center ring, so you have them all. So go ahead and crank that baby on in there. Put some muscle behind it. Give it a few turns, loosen everything up, back it out. First thing we want to do is find the very center which is right where it broke right there. You see the rings, they're kind of curving this way, but right there they start curving back that way. So that's the very center right here. So we'll start there and we'll count out and we'll see how old this tree is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now also, you see the light colored rings? The light colored rings are the tree growing during the growing season, the spring and the summer. The dark colored rings is the growth during the fall and winter, okay, when it's going dormant. So all you gotta do is count. It's easier to see the dark rings, so just count the dark rings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 20. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 30. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 40. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 50. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 60, 61. So 61 rings right here. Now from a seedling to the time it gets up where we got that first ring at. So 61, 3, 64. That tree's 64 years old. Okay. Typically, a loblolly pine can live. The lifespan is 80 to 100 years. Okay. But if you're trying to manage for the most timber and the most bang for your buck, needless to say, is taking that tree and growing it for 30 years, because after 30 years it really starts slowing down their growth naturally. So after 30 years, you'll get more money if you go ahead and cut that tree down and replant. Okay. So with loblolly pine, if you're growing just for timber production, growing for 30 years, cut them down, replant, start over, 30 more years, cut, replant. All right, now let's look at the thickness of these rings and how fast it was growing. So the first 10 or 15 years, probably 20 years, it was doing all right. You know, they're wide enough, spaced out enough, hadn't really slowed down. Once it gets about right here though, those last 30 years, especially the last 20 right here, there was like 20 rings right here. That thing only grew like an inch in diameter. You know, this tree could have been growing this much, you know, these last 20 years, it could have been growing this much. So it should have been, you know, that much bigger. So you can tell, you know, after 20 years or so, that tree started slowing down. Now, if we're trying to grow it out to 30 years, what's something we can do to make that tree start speeding up its growth some more?
Well, I guess space them out so they don't have to compete as much.
Yeah.
But
They're already spaced out. Yeah, exactly. They're already spaced out what they're going to be. But if we go in and do a thinning, we cut out that tree and that tree, that tree and that tree, then all the nutrients and water that these trees were taking up, now this tree can get them. So he's eating a lot more and drinking a lot more. So he's going to grow a lot more. Not all about height, it's about diameter too. It's because this tree would be considered a pulpwood tree. The size of that one, you're not going to get any lumber out of that tree right there, okay? So it would go for pulpwood. Pulpwood's about $7 or $8 a ton, okay? Once it gets to this size, it would be chip and saw. Just because the diameter is more than chip and saw trees, it just doubled in price. So now you're getting $15, $16, $18 a ton. Once you get to this one, it's saw finish. Now you're cutting 2 to 8, 2 to 6. You're cutting lumber, a lot of lumber out of this tree. Pretty close there. About all you're gonna get out of that one. Sold them all. just long enough. So again, look how spaced out these rings are the first 15, 20 years maybe. And then look how tight they get. This tree is barely doing anything, you know, these last 20 or 30 years. So it's in the same boat as that one.
To the environment and to the competition that's around it. So just wanted y'all to be able to see that. And so if any of y'all want to see any of these, we got them right back here in that box. Mr. Brandon. And then after a little lunch, group one, you'll come with me, Mr. Matt.
What does that do to the tree?
Well, it can't conduct photosynthesis anymore, so it'll just die.
Exactly. It can't make its energy. It can't do photosynthesis. It can't make energy. Now the trees, they usually put out the second growth. So let's say the caterpillar comes in, eats all the leaves off there in the spring. Usually, sometimes there's enough time the tree will put out a second growth of leaves, but that's a second. That's a lot of energy reserved to use to put out leaves twice in a year when it really just needs to do it once. So over time, year after year doing that, these insects can stress the tree, weaken it, kill it outside. So we hang traps in Georgia for different insects, native ones and invasive ones. And that one ties into, we had gypsy moth back in the mid-90s. There was a few little pockets of it in 3 different counties. They were able to detect them, treat them, and eradicate them before it became a big problem in the state. So that's part of why we do so many different, we trap for so many different types of insects. So for your merit badge, we're going to talk about 2 main insects and forest pathogens. So the first one I'm going to talk about is southern pine beetle. I'm going to go ahead and pass them around. I'm going to pass around. The insects do that too. Think about trees, they produce something that's really sticky. So maple syrup is a tree sap. And we make maple syrup out of sap. So pine trees have a lot of sap in them. They call it resins, another name for it. So when beetles start burrowing into the trees put out this sap and it catches them and kills them. Now if you're in a drought, what do you think happens to the tree and its ability to produce sap? Yeah, way down, it even stops. Like we had a drought in 2016, all you saw was sawdust from the insects going into the trees. The trees weren't even putting out sap to try to catch them and kill them. So the trees will defend themselves from the beetles. There's another vial with little red beetles in it. Those are clary beetles. Those are predatory insects for the southern pine beetles. So that's the other kind of ecosystem thing that helps fight the southern pine beetle. How they are different from the other bark beetles in the southeast is they'll infest trees and they'll move in a head. So you see the beetles started in this where all these trees are dead. All these yellow trees are trees that are currently infested, and the beetles, what they'll do is they bring that fungus with them, but they also make galleries. The beetles use trees to lay their eggs and for their larvae to eat the cambium of the tree. You have the bark, you have the cambium, you have the wood of the tree. They eat that living part, that cambium, and make galleries and lay their eggs along those galleries. And those eggs hatch, and little larvae come out, and they just eat that part of the tree, pupate, they come out, merge as adult beetles. So that's their life cycle. And one tree gets infested with a certain number of beetles, and then many times that come out. So during the spring, summer, fall, you'll have a big outbreak, and that's what you're seeing in this picture down here is the beetles are likely in these green trees. They just haven't turned yellow yet and haven't died yet. So that's what I call a southern pine beetle spot. And one of the ways to manage that is you go out beyond where the beetles have infested and you cut down the trees, 2 tree lengths. So however tall the trees are in the stand, you cut twice that length and you cut a buffer around it. And southern pine beetle have this weird weakness where they're not good flyers and they get disoriented. When you cut the trees down and they're laying on the ground, when those larvae pupate and come out, that naturalizes kind of, if it gets slow, it'll be a little bit of a balance where it's not wiping out a tree species, but it's not really taken over as bad as some of the other invasives. So there's a range to it. So it's caused by a fungus. And this is the same thing, but on a branch. It's a lot lower down in the tree, the stronger base you need. Yeah, it can improve it. Everybody using the bottom 16 feet of a tree. If you get a really big tree, it goes higher up than that. But fire that's getting up into the tops of trees, it's burning, it's killing everything, that's not a great wildfire. We call that a stand altering wildfire. So that's going to take the whole forest stand back to the beginning, back to the ground, whatever seeds are in the seed bed are going to come up. Maybe if it's hardwoods, you'll have some sprout, but usually that heat will kill the roots. So those big wildfires are not desirable by any means. But those low intensity, frequent wildfires that were natural to the ecosystem in most of Georgia, those are a really good thing to have because they come through every few years, so they don't get up into the trees and kill all the trees. They burn off the shrubby stuff in the understory. They cycle nutrients. They burn up the leaves and the pine needles and the down sticks and sometimes the logs if it's dry enough. Send all that nutrients back into the soil, open up the seed bed a little bit so stuff can start coming up through there. Depending on the intensity, it can be good or bad. One of the other things that's good with those low intensity wildfires is some species do really well with fire. Like pine species really do well. So if a prescribed burn or low intensity wildfire comes through, it kills competition and the pines do better. It reduces the number of sweet gum and maple sprouts and leaves your stand better for your pines. The other thing is like oaks. For oak regeneration, fire seems to be a really important thing to do, really important step. So oaks are a slower growing tree species compared to yellow poplar or sweet gum or cottonwood. So why they're slower growing is they put a lot of their energy into the roots for the first 2 or 3 years. Whereas as other species, they do it in top. They just have a little bit of roots. They try to race for the sun. So they put a lot of their growth. So you have a yellow poplar seed and an acorn seed germinate at the same time. The yellow poplar is going to be this tall, and that oak seedling is going to be down there for the first year. So if left unchecked, that yellow poplar is going to outcompete that oak seedling. But what happens if you come through after a couple of years, you do a prescribed burn, you top kill both of them. What burning does, wildfire, low intensity wildfire, or prescribed burning, top kills the vegetation. But that oak has a big root system, so it can put out new growth really quick, whereas that yellow poplar doesn't have that. So it's either going to kill it outright, or it's going to be much slower growing that next year or two after that oak. So that oak is going to get a chance to compete with it and reforest the stand that way with an oak species. Yeah, so what I mean by improper harvest.
Harvesting too early or too late?
Harvesting trees too early or too late, so that's one. If you harvest too early, trees haven't matured, they're going to keep their limbs and you're not going to have the best timber quality. What else?
Too much.
Too much. So there's a thing called high grading. Does anybody know or could guess what I mean by high grading? Not exactly. It's logging. So if a logger comes through and high grades a site, it's not a good thing. They come through and they pick out the best trees. So let's say you have a stand of nice big oak trees, and then you have some of the red buds in the understory, some sweet gum, some maple, all like little diameter, straggly things. They come through and they cut out all the oak. That's high grade, and you leave. So it's when you take the best stuff and you leave the worst stuff behind. So in that situation, they cut all the oak trees. You don't have all that mass production. Hard mast is what that's called. Acorns are hard mast for wildlife, for deer, turkey, all those critters that like them. You cut all the oak trees out, you don't have it anymore, and it takes a lot of years before the remaining trees in the stand get big enough to start producing oak acorns again. So that'd be high grading. That'd be a bad harvesting management option. Another one would be a species mix. So let's say they come through and they cut out a species. Maple trees are good for a few things, but does anybody know maples? They bloom early in the season. They bloom late winter, very early spring. So why would that be a good thing? They bloom. They get their little flowers all over their branches to produce their seed. Pollination. So they're one of the first things that bloom in the late winter. So bees, I had 2 beehives before they died from pests. These bees, you could see them flying around the maple trees. So If you have somebody cut out all those, it affects native and native pollinators and honeybees. So species mixed with harvesting, if they're cutting out stuff that you want to keep or stuff that's good for the ecosystem, is kind of a downside.
So somebody tell me, we're going to focus on three main things right now that trees need. What is one thing?
Water.
Water, yes. What's another thing?
Sunlight.
Sunlight, yes. What's another thing? Nutrients. Food.
Soil.
Yeah, they need that as well, but it's got to give it. So the three things there. What we're going to talk about today is kind of what happens when you don't have those and what happens when you do have those. Water, and red is going to represent nutrients, or this burgundy color, and white will be sunlight. So everybody reach around and grab what you can on 1, 2, 3, go.
Like we're supposed to race?
Bro, y'all are diving all
Don't
over
move.
the
Don't
ground.
move. Can't move. Don't move.
You can't walk around.
You're rooted. You're rooted. You can't move. Trees got legs now?
All forward.
All right.
This man all
All right. Everybody stand back up.
I'm a serious tree. Oh, yeah.
How's it looking to y'all? Is anybody missing a color? Who doesn't have a red? Uh-oh. Who doesn't have a blue?
Yeah, I got
Oh, that's pretty good. So we had a good rainfall, so we're not missing any water. Who doesn't have a white?
Not much water.
All right. Well, everybody's getting plenty of sunlight then.
have to be water. I can so much sunlight, guys.
All right. Yeah. Anybody missing something? You're going down. You are now a stressed out tree, and you have problems. You are in a state of decline.
What's red?
So this is to show you that it's very important to have all three sources of these nutrients, water, and sunlight. This goes to show it's important where you plant the tree, and it's important to water that tree when it doesn't have water. Sunlight's kind of a given. That goes with plant it in the right spot. If you plant it, some trees prefer a lot of sun, some don't. So if you have a tree that doesn't like full sun, it needs a little bit of shade. So just to show that the importance of these three factors of nutrients, sunlight, and water that trees need. How do y'all trees feel that are still standing?
I feel powerful.
Yeah, happy. It's good. That's the way trees want to feel.
Being here or just in life, yeah, of life and what we do. And logs in containers and ship them across so they could turn them into the products they needed. So just a really unique view of what we have here in the state of Georgia and how we impact everything from our state to this nation and to the world. And so right here where this logging's going on, you can see right here, this is what they use to harvest. So this is a feather buncher. It basically comes up and grabs the tree, the saw's here, and it basically cuts it right at the ground level, and then lays it over. And then when it lays it over, this is a grappler skidder. It comes up and grabs it and picks it up and hauls it back in what we call yarding and takes it up to the logging deck. And there a loader is sitting and waiting, and it takes it and it separates out the tree and the different products. So whether it's pulpwood, chip and saw timber, it'll lay them out and then it'll load it on the appropriate truck to haul to the mill. And so that just kind of gives you a rundown of what's occurring and going on in the woods through those. And then here's different things through history. Behind y'all can see it's called gum naval stores, turpentine. That was something that was really popular up until about the 1950s. Those were used in ships to seal them, and so that was really big business, especially down near Statesboro, near our ports in that area. And so you can see here, this is these turpentine, putting the turpentine in the barrels, and they would haul it out. And basically they would, and that's what it looked like right there. So it had a little container, and they would cut into the tree, and then that sap would flow down in that container, and that's how they collected it. I guess our focus is to help you realize research that shows that being outside, latex is likely going to move when you're indoors. you're doing what y'all were doing at lunch, looking at a screen.
I like that. I want to I like that.
What's the impact when we're putting line in on the fire helicopter, dropping water? This is what it took to talk to somebody way back then, and now it takes something that size. That's right. So we went from that to that. So pretty impressive how far technology's come, and so with all that, that reduces. Well, it also helps in how we're contacted. Everybody's got a cell phone these days, right?
Right.
So most people will see a fire and call it in immediately. Well, back in when I was y'all's age, if I found a fire, I had to drive all the way to somebody's house or to a payphone and pick up that thing that had a wire attached to it and call the fire in. Well, it's way simpler now. So our response times are even better. So just great examples of how technology's improved through the years to help us do better. So in here,
and you can imagine what that was probably high tech back in the day. But this is what we actually started with this. And we had a little plow hooked to the back of it. This is an old World War II Jeep that they would plow with. Cuts pulpwood. They go out and they cut by hand pulpwood trees and put them on the ground and then load them on a truck. And that's the other way you can get that up in there. Let's go.
It's healthy. As you go up, if you see a dead branch, in a pine tree, they sell prunes, so you will see that often. If you see it hanging, that's a different story. As you get up, if you see a tree with a dead top, what does that mean? If it's a pine tree, it's probably dead. Something's going on with it. If you see brown needles, that's not a good sign, right? So today I'm just going to talk to you about tree risk. I want to get your eye kind of focused in on what you're going to look for when you see risky trees. When you have a risky tree, there is something wrong with it. There is a defect in that tree. Something is causing it to not perform correctly. If there is a defect there and it's in the middle of the woods, if it falls, what happens?
Not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot, right. There has to be a target for it to carry risk, right? If this tree right here failed, are there targets around here?
Yes.
Yes. We'll talk about that. So the first tree we're going to talk about is this one over here. Let's all walk around it and look at it. So this was cut, and it probably didn't seal. You can see this is response wood right here. It tried to roll over and seal itself up, just like a scar on your body. If you cut your arm and your scar comes out, that's what this is. If it does not come over, open door policy to all the bugs to just come eat, stay, whatever they want to do. And I'm assuming that's what happened here. When you see knotted up wood like this is basically a scar on a tree. This is pretty tough stuff. If a tree does this, it was healthy enough at the time of the damage to heal itself. It just couldn't do enough because that's a lot of stuff going on. So, is this tree risky?
Yeah.
I would say so. There's a major problem there. If this tree was in the middle of downtown, it would be gone, correct?
Yes.
Is it risky right here? What's the target?
Maybe the road, maybe a little bit, like maybe the top could reach the
If a storm comes through tonight and this tree totally falls over, roots and everything come up, what's your target?
yeah, the fence or the road.
Fence, property, road. If it fell over and hit that road right now, is that dangerous?
No, not really.
It's not gonna hurt the road.
But if there's somebody in a car or if there's somebody walking on that road, yes, there is some risk. It doesn't happen often, so it's not a huge risk. If this tree was downtown, major risk. If it was out on that highway, major risk. This tree here and the dead pine next to the building, which one is more dangerous? Dead pine. I agree. Why? Because building. There's people. There's going to be more people in that building more often than there are on this road. All right, this tree here versus the dead pine in the field. Which one would you say? Yeah, the one over the power line.
Power line one.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. My opinion here, I would rank that dead pine over this one because this one clearly is still thriving. Look at these leaves. It has enough juice to keep going. So I would take out that dead pine there. I would take out that dead pine there, and then I would take out this one next. Fun fact about a tree itself has enough strength to hold itself plus a whole lot more. So when I tell people, there is decay in this tree, sometimes, it's obviously a factor to think about, but it doesn't mean just get rid of the tree right then because it has a little bit of decay. A tree itself, 100% tree right here, has enough strength to hold itself. If the middle 70% was rotten and your outside 30% was solid wood, that is enough to hold that tree. 30% of itself can hold itself up. So some trees can have decay, and how much risk are you willing to take as a homeowner with a tree like this in your yard? If you love the tree, you love the shade, you want to keep it. You just have to understand what the liability is with it.
Yeah, you could so much, but it's very invasive. It's only beautiful about a month of the year.
So one of the things is learn about 15 tree species. So y'all learned about how many out there. Alex, show us tree species. This right. Knows what it is.
I haven't done much leaf modeling in my career, but here we are. Raise your hand if you know what it is.
I definitely like it.
That's all right.
She said that's no.
A big piece of land.
All right, not in front of the peanut gallery, please.
Is that a tree?
Yeah, go with the tree one. They're all trees, no shrubs.
All right, is it opposite or alternate?
It's
Why do
Alternate.
we care?
It's alternate.
Yeah, it's alternate.
Is it compound or simple?
It's
Compound. I mean simple.
simple. Where's my program crazy?
Simple.
All right, it's no.
All right, this is a willow oak. It is skinny and it's slender. Very much similar to a water oak, but the water oaks flare out. The willow oak is a better tree from an arborist standpoint.
All right,
That's a hot take.
A water oak. Water oak.
Water oak.
Boom.
Water oak.
It's hard pudding.
All right, listen up. Sometimes it's hollow.
Sometimes you gotta take the hard back. You gotta take the hard back.
When it's old, it's white in the top.
Is it a red maple? A red maple. The water oak? It's got spiky red oak.
We done graduated from the oaks.
Liz? Honky, give us a hit.
Platinus occidentalis.
What?
Platinus.
What's the first letter of the
Hyphenate up to this town.
English.
Starts with an S.
S?
Sycamore.
Sycamore.
White oak.
Yeah. What kind of pine? All right. This pine has 3 needles in the cluster.
And in West Virginia and Georgia, we call that fascicle, but I don't know what they must
In the cluster. It's a cluster. All right, what did we say this was?
Virginia pine.
Look at the cone.
Short leaf pine.
No.
Really
Lullaby. Spruce pine. Pond pine.
It's the most common pine in the state. Yeah.
Red pine?
Pitch pine.
Regular bob.
Pond pine.
Yes.
Loblolly pine.
Yeah.
Not very much.
Dogwood. The berry is you see,
That is an And
Yeah, opposite or alternate leaf?
which one are we?
Opposite.
Compound or simple? This is opposite.
Compound.
There's only, what species are opposite? What is this?
Maple, ash, and dog.
What do you think it is?
Maple, dogwood, and
Say it.
Ash.
All right, how do we know it's an ash?
from
The little weird leafy things.
yeah, the little Hawaii thing that people use.
Little banana pearls.
Yeah.
Green ash, right?
Majority is green ash. All right. What do we got?
Not pine.
Not pine tree.
That's not pine.
It's an oak tree. It grows in
Which one's that? Is it the blackjack oak?
What is a black one?
Blackjack oak grows up on old sandy sites. This thing grows somewhere.
That's her.
Swan.
Water. Chestnut oak.
Acres oak.
We have a leaf.
Oh, the red, red,
Redwood.
Redbud. Ding, ding, ding. Redbud. Heart-shaped leaf. Heart-shaped leaf. This is the biggest ID on that. I got
Magnolia.
Cypress.
all right.
Magnolia tree.
What is it?
Peach tree.
It's
Cherry.
a something oak.
Cherry tree. Oh.
Wilson.
Live oak.
Live oak. Who says
Say it one more time. What?
Live oak.
What is it?
One of y'all said
The Georgia State tree. This will be a very much unalive oak.
Bald cypress. Cypress.
That one.
That's red oak. It's red oak.
Northern or southern? Southern's got a bell shape.
Yeah. Southern Belle. I got some extra credit to who knows what state this is the state tree of.
Mississippi.
You win.
What's my prize?
What's my prize? Mississippi's broke.
What do trees do to help us fight climate change?
They release oxygen.
They're shade.
They
take carbon
dioxide. Say it so they can hear us.
They take in carbon dioxide.
And we call that carbon sequestration. It's not the answer, but it is part of the puzzle. I read somewhere that, and Troy can correct me if I'm wrong, that all the trees in Georgia sequester enough carbon to take up the carbon that the cars in Atlanta put out. So how many states have all 24 million acres that they can suck up all the carbon for their one big industrial or metropolitan area? So it's not the, we don't have enough trees to suck up all the carbon, but we can suck up some.
It's the management of forest.
That is able
Wait a
to
minute,
work.
let him talk.
So it's like the practice of managing forests so that you can keep utilizing the resources from the forest. Timber, making it sustainable for the wildlife.
Sustainability talks about we're able to use the forest today while providing for the forest tomorrow. In other words, it's a renewable resource, and by managing that forest and using those products and all, our grandkids will still have a forest intact to provide them products. What's renewable resource? You wanted to talk, so give it to me. Renewable resource, what's that mean?
Oh, that you can reuse again.
Is coal a renewable resource?
No.
Sure it is, it only takes how many billions of years?
I don't think we live that long.
Hazard tree, why do we care about hazard trees?
Because they're hazards.
They're hazardous.
Why?
They hurt the carbon.
Wait a minute, he brings up a good point. Is a tree in the middle of the woods with a broken top a hazard?
No.
Why?
Because there's no target.
No target? Oh my gosh, you saw exactly what you heard before.
No hazards.
Look at all these arborists. No target. I love it. That's funny.
No population, no hazards.
Take it off. Low Visit a local forester. Oh my goodness.
Hey.
What, if you were interested in forestry, what kind of different jobs could you get?
Park ranger.
Park ranger, blasphemy.
Job. Forester. You can get a job.
A naturist.
Naturalistic work, yeah, sure could. And you could be a park ranger.
You could be a pilot.
Some of the ones that can't cut in this forestry, we let them in.
A wildland firefighter.
Wildland firefighter, very good. Yeah. So the point that I tried to get across to y'all, if you have varied interests, there are a lot of different things that you can go into and still be in the
You could even be a pilot.
a pilot. Somebody mentioned that earlier. We didn't go over there, but we got like 20 airplanes and a helicopter that we use in the forestry commission for a lot of different things. Brandon probably talked about flying up and down looking for beetles. So do y'all feel like you put in the work to get the forestry merit badge?
Definitely.
For sure.
We've been on that grind.
Well, I got some blue cards.
Are we finally done?
We're done.
Oh no, I'm so sad. I want it to be longer.
No! Yeah, what's wrong with you?
That's why you get the career.
Go to Clemson. Georgia, but seriously, to really go into the profession of forestry, you need to go to a Society of American Forest accredited 4-year program. And in Georgia, we have two, ABAC and University of Georgia.
Go Stallions. Woo!
They have both have really good programs. And I kid about Clemson, they have a great program. Mississippi, West Virginia. Brandon was in Arizona. Who else?
Requirement in the book, I think number 8 talks about visit with a professional forester and talk about their education and the things that they've done throughout their career. And all the guys that you've worked with today have been foresters. You know, they have 4-year degrees from forestry schools and actually went into forestry as a profession. And I guess the interesting part to me about forestry in some ways is I got my interest in forestry from scouts. I knew, you know, I was good in biology and science and those kinds of things, and I knew I wanted some kind of job where I would work outside. And I knew about parks, you know, park rangers, you know, where you go camping and a little bit about forestry. But I got interested and I ended up, and I had a scoutmaster who was a forester. And so I learned more from him about it. And then it turned out one of the summer camps that we used to go to, the ranger there he was a forest technician. And so I learned about from him, and I ended up working in that summer camp 2 summers as a forestry merit badge.